Back in 2020, a strange pandemic gripped the entire planet. The disease instilled such an intense fear of going outside that anyone who dared step beyond their door collapsed within seconds, their breath stolen away. Streets emptied, intersections fell silent, and it felt like civilization had frozen in stone. Mark Delgado had been stuck inside his company's building for 3 months, surviving on leftover cafeteria food while helping co-workers dig through the parking lot in hopes of reaching the subway. One day, he noticed someone had smashed a car window to steal a GPS. Rage surged through him, and he shoveled harder than ever, until that fury cracked the wall open, finally carving a way out. As the team prepared to leave, Mark spotted something unsettling. His boss, Enrique, had the stolen GPS hidden in his bag. Suspicion lit a fire in him, and he decided to confront the truth. Enrique agreed to talk privately, but only if Mark promised silence. The conversation yanked Mark back to the days when Enrique first arrived at the company. He was hired to fix falling productivity and earned a reputation for ruthless efficiency, firing people without hesitation, even humiliating Mark in a meeting for being behind on a project. Mark tried to explain the programming challenges, but Enrique didn't care. He gave an ultimatum: finish by the end of the month or lose your job. That pressure chained Mark to his desk, frustration boiling over with every failed line of code. In the middle of it all, his girlfriend Julia called to say she and her friend Andrea were closing shop and wanted him to join them for dinner. He promised, but fate wasn't on his side. His computer crashed with the dreaded blue screen, forcing him to work late again. By the time he finally dragged himself home, the neighbor greeted him at the door just to reassure him he was back safely. Julia had already eaten alone. That evening, Mark found Julia in her shop, carefully crafting toys. She held a puppet with a tenderness that hinted at the future she dreamed of, even daring to mention a child. Mark, however, shut the thought down. These weren't the times for such hopes. Sleep avoided him that night, so he flicked on the TV. The news showed a chilling story. A Canadian teenager, trapped in his own house for 6 months, had taken his own life and recorded the entire ordeal. The next day, the office felt heavy as the staff watched the same video together. Mark noticed his coworker Rira slipping away, pale and jittery. Someone whispered that Rira hadn't changed clothes in days and had even stopped bathing. Back in the present, Mark confessed his true desire to Enrique, reaching Julia. In the pitch-black tunnels of the subway, a GPS was their only chance. Phones were useless now. He offered Enrique a trade: lead him to Julia, and he'd hand over everything stolen from Rira's locker. Enrique resisted, until Mark threatened to expose him for stealing the GPS. Cornered, Enrique agreed. The two said their goodbyes and stepped down into the underground maze. The GPS worked fine, but to save battery they relied on an old map instead. The tunnels were already swarming with survivors, gunshots echoing in the dark, pushing them to move faster. When they finally reached a station, the place was packed wall to wall with desperate faces. Suddenly, a teenager lunged and snatched Enrique's bag, the GPS inside. Both men chased him through the chaos, dodging fire and weaving past panicked crowds, until they cornered him near the turnstiles. But the boy wasn't alone. 3 others emerged, including his older brother, a former cop now armed and ruthless. As the city above sank into darkness from a sudden blackout, the ex-cop forced Mark and Enrique to their knees. Meanwhile, his brother dug through the bag, pulled out the GPS, and leaned in closer, ready to strip Mark of everything he still carried. As the last light inside the station flickered out, Enrique lunged at the ex-cop, wrestling for the gun. Mark dove for the boy and snatched the GPS off the floor. Its screen cracked but still alive. Clutching the bag to his chest, he ducked behind a column while Enrique fought savagely, ripping the weapon free and shooting the ex-cop dead. Another round left one of the accomplices writhing on the ground. Breathless, Enrique rushed back to Mark, and together they slipped into the crowd, vanishing into the cover of darkness. At the stairwell, Enrique wrapped a makeshift bandage around his bleeding hand while Mark checked the GPS. Damaged but still functional. When Enrique tucked the gun into his belt, Mark's chest tightened with fear, suspecting he might be left behind. But Enrique promised he'd honor the deal. Mark's mind drifted back to the days before lockdown. One morning, heading to work, he heard strange noises from his neighbor's apartment, like a swarm of mosquitoes buzzing in heavy waves. The door was ajar. Curious, he stepped inside and gagged at the stench. Trash bags stacked high filled the place, rotting in the heat. The neighbor appeared out of nowhere, knife in hand, paranoid and furious, as if Mark had no right to notice his existence after ignoring him for so long. When Mark asked how long he'd been inside, the man confessed. Months without stepping out, too terrified to face the air beyond his door. Later that day, at the office, Mark saw guards dragging out Ruar, another coworker. He'd been fired for sleeping at his desk, never going home. Mark followed helplessly as they shoved him outside. The second Ruar's feet touched open ground. His body convulsed violently. Mark screamed for them to bring him back in, but by then it was already too late. Mark realized Rira was already gone. Later, he searched Rivera's locker and pulled out whatever survival gear he could find. A flashlight, a gas canister, and a few cans of food. That evening, he told Julia everything, admitting his growing fear that something much bigger was unfolding. She comforted him, and for a while, they drowned in each other's love. In the present, Mark jolted awake to find Enrique missing. Panic spiked. Had he been abandoned? But soon Enrique returned, carrying a plastic bag to protect the GPS from water. Together, they descended deeper into the subway tunnels. Mark pressed him about his destination, curious who, or what, he was heading toward, but Enrique refused to answer. What Mark did notice, though, was that Enrique saved every seed from what he ate. Apples, fruits, anything, like they were gold. Eventually, the GPS guided them to a sewage access point. They jumped down, landing hard but cushioned by water. Following the signal, they finally reached the lower levels of Mark's apartment building. Their plan was crude. Hang the gas canister from a ceiling pipe and blow it open with a shot. Enrique's aim failed. Mark tried next. His first shot went wide, bursting his ear and drawing blood. On the second attempt, the explosion cracked through concrete, hurling him to the floor. Enrique pulled him up, and together they climbed through the rubble into the building. Like the station, the place was crammed with refugees. Mark's old neighbor was still there, but his own apartment door was broken. A single eye peeked through the peephole, watching them. Rage boiled over. Mark pounded on the door, shouting, until a man spoke back in a foreign language. When the man's hand slipped through the gap, Mark bit him, forcing him back and barging inside. The intruder raised a knife, but Enrique pulled his gun. The tension froze as the man's wife and young daughter appeared. The little girl, who understood their language, explained. They had nowhere else to go and had taken over the empty apartment. Both men lowered their weapons. Mark insisted the place was his, lifting Julia's photo off the wall and demanding if they had seen her. The family swore the apartment was empty when they moved in. Searching the place, Enrique found no food in the fridge, only dead pigeons prepared for eating, and even salvaged seeds from an old popcorn bag in the trash. He also pocketed a kitchen knife. Meanwhile, Mark wandered to Julia's work table. There lay her puppet and a child's drawing. Flipping the paper over, he froze. In the corner was a doctor's name. It wasn't just a drawing, it was an ultrasound image. Julia had been pregnant. The last time he saw her, he had no idea. Mark's mind replayed their last moments together. He and Julia had been watching the news, the broadcast calling the plague the panic, as it swallowed the world in waves of death. The government urged citizens to stay calm, to keep living life as if nothing had changed. Mark's anger boiled over. It only worsened when footage showed pregnant women giving birth in the middle of chaos. He erupted, shouting about how reckless it was. And in that instant, Julia finally understood. Mark never wanted children. Every excuse he'd given before had just been a lie. Julia collapsed in tears and ran into the bathroom, locking the door. She ignored his voice as he begged through the wood. The next morning, Mark left for work. The streets were already empty, trash piling up on corners, the subway crowded with masked strangers. At the office, he tried calling Julia, but her friend Andrea answered instead, telling him Julia didn't want to speak to him. Crushed, Mark decided to rush home. But by then, phones were dead, TVs cut off. And when he tried stepping outside, something gripped him so hard he panicked and sprinted back indoors, where he stayed, trapped for good. Now, in the present, rain had begun to fall. Mark and Enrique dragged out an old stretcher to catch the water, filling bottles to share with the family sheltering in his apartment. Soon the entire city followed suit, raising poles, pans, and buckets toward the sky. That night, Enrique carved 2 spears out of broom handles while Mark filled fresh bottles. Quietly, Mark slipped Julia's puppet into his bag, refusing to leave it behind. By morning, they were back in the sewers. At a fork in the tunnels, their fragile alliance cracked. With a crooked smile, he admitted that back in the old days, even if Mark had finished the project on time, he probably would have fired him anyway. That too ended in laughter. Then Enrique grew quiet, confessing his real fear, that if his father had already died, no one would even notice. There were things left unsaid between them, words he still needed to speak. In return, Mark confessed his own truth. He had told Julia he didn't want children, but that was only half true. He was terrified of being unable to protect a child, terrified of failing as a father. And now, in a world like this, the fear only dug deeper. Hours later, they returned to the sewers and crossed paths with a family coming the other way. One of them was badly wounded. They begged to be led to the hospital. But the news crushed Enrique. Rumors said the hospital where his father lay had already burned to the ground. In a panic, Enrique ran into a nearby room, climbing to a high window to see if the rumors were true. His father's hospital had burned down. Overwhelmed with emptiness, he broke the window, preparing to jump. But Mark shoved him back. "I need you, Enrique," he urged. Enrique reluctantly handed over seeds for his child and signaled for Mark to go. Mark descended back into the sewers and, after navigating dark, winding paths, finally reached the mall. The parking lot was littered with corpses, the air cold with death. Fear of being followed pushed him faster toward Julia's store, but he only found Andrea's mother's body. Desperate, he searched through papers, only to find a note on the mall window. Andrea had written they were trapped in the supermarket section. Mark rushed toward the supermarket, where guards warned him off with arrows. He pulled out a photo of his apartment and calmly explained he wasn't looking for a fight, just Julia. A guard went to check for her. That's when Mark noticed movement behind him, shadowy figures entering the mall. A violent fight broke out between the two groups, and in the chaos, Mark pushed forward. He found Andrea, who said she last saw Julia heading to the doctor. But as they made their way to an exit, a burning beam fell between them, trapping Andrea. Mark had to make his way through the fire to save her. Andrea opened the exit, but fear kept her frozen. Before Mark could pull her out, the ceiling collapsed, crushing her instantly. Mark didn't stop, he sprinted the other way only to be tackled by a raider. Just as the knife was about to strike, Enrique appeared, shoving the attacker off. "Told you you'd still need me," he said. But the raider lunged again, blade aimed at Enrique's gut. Enrique raised his spear, then hesitated. It was just a kid. He let him go, brushed off his own wound, and urged Mark to move before the mall collapsed. Through the sewers, they surfaced inside a dark, abandoned movie theater. Dust-covered seats and a frozen screen gave the room an eerie stillness. Across the street, through a glass door, Mark spotted Julia's doctor's office. But the tunnel was blocked. Heart pounding, he climbed higher, peering through a window. And then there she was, Julia. He slammed the glass, shouting her name until, finally, she turned. Their eyes locked. For one suspended moment, everything stopped. Tears of relief streamed down both faces. Against all odds, they had found each other again. As the blinding white light spread, Mark realized he had finally crossed the street. Julia was there, waiting. Tears turned to joy as they embraced, their love finally whole. Inside the building, they built a fragile new life, collecting rainwater, planting Enrique's seeds, and raising a strong son untouched by the panic. Years later, when wandering teens appeared, they let their boy step outside, carrying the hope of rebuilding the world. In the end, the story reminds us that no matter how deep the darkness, love, courage, and the next generation can always bring back the light.